And then Mr. Lafore and Dr. Lafore actually is going to moderate the second sessions for us. And then may I now invite the speakers, Professor Clift, Professor Roslad, and then Professor William Lau, and also Dr. Lee to come up to the stage, quote unquote, and then to join the panel again. As Dr. Lafore just mentioned, we're going to focus a little bit more on the red and the green bit. That's the human aspects and also the decision making, what needs to be done and what kind of actions that we can take to address some of the potential changes of monsoon in Asia. So over to you, Dr. Lafore.
So now we can start with question following maybe the picture I gave. So maybe we can continue on the first level concerning the geophysical level. If there is more question, and after we can try. Maybe you may have some question directly on the second level concerning the impact on society. And after, it's open. For example, we had the question of water resource before the break, so it's you see that's a key issue to build such warning system, and so up to you. Is there some question?
Well, you mentioned the issue of having to have systems in place, and one of the questions, I guess, is that, of course, in Europe you have a sort of multinational system with the EU, but that's, and in the United States is a large area, so it's got a national government. But in Asia, other than China, mostly we're dealing with a lot of small countries, and they do have some trade and very weak national sort of international systems working. But what do you see coming down the pipeline that's going to help people to address water resources? For example, the Mekong River right now, China is damming the river and other countries are damming the river as well, and this is going to create a problem of sharing this water. So what kind of the UN doesn't seem to have the power to do anything. It can promote talking, but there doesn't seem to be anything with the power of, say, like the EU. So what can be done?
But first I would say that in what I presented, a key question is education, formation. And and in one sense, the fact that we have a huge disaster, it's a way to trigger, to change way to think. And from that, there was some decision to take at a political level or different to get organized and to do something and to put money in that direction. But the education, training, communication is, I think, the first things to do. The second point, also for me, is sure that you have a lot of small countries with other priority. So the priority is to get food for today. It's typically in Africa. So it's not a question for them. It's not a question of few years. It's a question of days. So they have a priority. So it's very difficult for them to, they know, but what to do. So the education of people, the states, people having a role is very important in the first step. And also the second thing is it's a way how to work with such countries because in general, those countries developing, undeveloped country in development, they need help. But for this help, the way to work often is to give what they need. in fact, it doesn't work. We have to work with them to improve their way to get what they need. So it's very important, this part. And right now, what we are doing is to give people or sell products. But we have to do that with them. If not, they are not concerned. So it's behind you have the problem of development. So for such countries, but the problem is different for other industrialized countries where there is some structure and where we can set up some structure to discuss that. Yeah. So what I wanted to say.
I have my feeling is that a lot of this is economic, that especially developing countries. I mean, it feels to me that the attitude is often, well, climate change, that's sort of something that rich countries can worry about. But right at the moment, we're trying to develop our industries and make better our economy and improve the income of our people, and that we'll worry about dirty water and heavy rains later. And I think that some of this can be addressed through communication if people can be convinced that there is an economic argument to be made, that this is not just something that it's like a rich person's hobby, but actually something that development of your economy in the context of good environmental practices is in your economic interest as well as in your social interest. I think that's maybe a good way to go, and that in some ways I'm encouraged a little bit about Asia, because I don't know if organisations like ASEAN make much difference or not, but in some ways actually the nature of government in China helps a little bit. At least having when I look at some of the dysfunctionality of the US government in getting gridlocked in Congress. And one thing about when I visited, I remember going to a meeting in China 8-10 years ago now. And we met with Guangdong local government officials, and they were not really very interested in climate change. But it seems to me that the context has changed somewhat in that time. And the very fact that, all it really takes is a change of mind at the government level, and then things really begin to happen in a way that is actually quite more difficult in a country like the US or in India, for example, where there are other competing interests. But it seems to me that if the Chinese government decides next week that, okay, we're really going to do something, then something will really happen. That's my opinion, anyway.
There's danger to that, too.
Yeah. Try building the Three Gorges Dam in the US. Good luck with that.
We'll continue
To
to answer after we go to another question.
Yeah, well, it's along the same line on the education and communication. And I want to stress that this communication education should go both ways. It shouldn't be experts telling people what to do. It should, in fact, more the other way around, is that what people need, and they're telling experts, and so you have to respect what other people think. It's not simply that, because we come from this view, this is bigger, so we will say you do this and do that. But really is what the only way to resolve this global problem is that everybody work together. So in order to do that, it's two-way education, okay? So about the people who, this cuts across class or cuts across first world versus second world or third world. We have to listen, because ultimately, every country, every person, in a sense, their most important issue has to do with kind of the preservation of their own people, if you think of the country in that sense. That's the right thing to do. If you are head of a government, that's what you do. So the thing is that we need to be listening to each other, and the scientists need to listen to the public also listen, and then we would increase that communication both ways. That's the point I like to emphasize in terms of really going ahead and respecting others' information. That's very important.
On the first question, you want to add something?
Testing. testing. Okay, I think it's about money because if we persuade someone to do something, we should tell him or her, okay, how much you can get from doing this, right? I think for the cooperation in resource management, I think it is a bit difficult because most of the resources are commons, environmental commons. So it is, I don't know how to have property right arrangement in a proper way. This is the challenge to have sustainable resource management, especially about water. Some countries just build dams themselves without considering the interests of other countries. So it's no, because it's about money, right? So I think what we can do is to help them visualize the benefits, visualize the economic benefits they could obtain from doing this, right? Maybe we need to really translate some benefit into dollar sign, or else they couldn't understand, right? Do you agree with me? It's about money. Yes, it's about economic. It's about money. So I hope this can, one of the research direction our scientists could go ahead with, that is trying to quantify the benefits of doing something in order to have important information to convince other people to do that. And the other research, and the other thing I'm thinking about is how to communicate the risk to the lay public. Because perhaps I use an example. I published a very good paper in top journal, but if I put this paper to a layman, what will happen to him? Maybe he or she just throw the paper away. Because for me, if I don't have any knowledge beforehand, if you give me a paper, most likely it will take me about 1 week or even longer period to understand that paper. I'm not kidding you. I'm full-time in doing this. It takes me about maybe 1 week or even longer period to fully understand the paper. So I think the problem is, okay, we may have very sophisticated method in our mind, but we need to do something to translate those knowledge into something which could be understood by most of the people. So maybe this is the thing researchers should pay extra effort to do this.
On your side, do you want to?
Well, at the risk of repeating what's been said already, I think it's important that everyone is here because we care about the issue, and it's our duty in a sense then to try to convey the message to others. And someone asked me earlier in the break, what can Hong Kong do? And Hong Kong seems like a small country geographically, but Hong Kong is an important part of China and has a very important relationship with it. And at least from my perspective, it seems that Hong Kong and your people have a lot of influence in China in terms of shared culture and language and a lot of family connections. And so Hong Kong actually is well positioned to be able to educate China and to try to convey the message.
Dr. LaFour talked about education, and Dr. Lau talks about education, communication, and Dr. Lee talked about climate change being a necessary but not sufficient condition. So somehow a group of persons have to be educated, but we have forgotten about it, and that is those in power at the top of the government. Apparently, people at the top of the Hong Kong government and many other governments never think that climate change is high on the agenda. How could we educate them? Or actually, they never thought that they need education. But even if we educate all the people in this room and people in the street, nothing could happen because we are now an organized society, and someone is controlling the operation of this society. So how could you change the mind of these people? It is difficult because they are enjoying the benefits of the current system, but we have to transition to an alternative system. So there's a very significant barrier to cross. I just don't know how we could achieve this. So could you enlighten us on this point?
Yeah, I share your point of view, but we are a society, so we have to discuss together, build alternative. It's my feeling, but maybe others.
I mean, I don't think this is something that can be forced very easily, but if there are sufficient, especially negative economic consequences of not doing things in response to, say, continued drying of North China or flash flooding of South China or wherever, that is the type of thing that once the system becomes less and less profitable, that there may be attempts to try and respond to that. But I suspect it may take substantial natural catastrophes to provoke the political system into doing things. I'm thinking like in the US, like Hurricane Katrina wrecking New Orleans was something that eventually prodded people into doing something at least about that. Not that we're allowed to talk about climate change anymore, but that's, trying to educate, as you say, like the ruling class is actually quite difficult, isn't it? But they do know, as you say, they enjoy the system at the moment, and if that system becomes less profitable and less enjoyable because of refusal to do anything, then that may be the type of thing when it hurts them in their pocketbooks. You want to say something, Barry?
I think, again, it seems hopeless at the face value, but there aren't. I don't see any children in the room, but often we may know that we shouldn't be doing this or that, and we don't pay attention to it. But but if your child then sees you littering on the street. And reminds you that, Dad, that's not good for the earth. You shouldn't be doing that. People tend to listen to their children. They think about what's good for their family, and I think that there has to be a way of making it personal. There has to be a personal connection. Even for these leaders, I mean, we see this in terms of the Chinese leaders. What I see in Hawaii and what I see in America, I see a lot of very wealthy Chinese sending their children to America to live the good life. They're interested in their kids. I mean, maybe they want to retire also in America. I don't know, but I mean, there's a lot of interest, I think, in one way to people's, maybe the way to the politicians' minds is through their children, and the way to that is to get them while they're young. If you want to keep people from starting to smoke, the way to do that is to get them when they're young, not when they're old.
Say something?
Yeah, so I agree with the previous speaker in terms of the difficulty of getting the governments to work. But from my own opinion, on the brighter side is that, yeah, we are doing this. We're trying to educate both ways. And when I came to Hong Kong, and actually I was quite surprised. I'm quite surprised that when I visit my friends and talk to their kids, they are actually much more aware of this environment. I think it's working in some sense. Of course, when it translates into action, it still will take some time. But if you look on the longer term, this is that new generation who have the awareness. I think that's for the last 10, 15 years. I've seen more of that happening here, especially in Hong Kong. I don't see it actually not too much in the Washington, D.C. area where I live. There are actions going on. But here, I actually do see kids and all the activities. That's a good thing. I mean, we know this is a long-term process, and we look for these future leaders. So that's part I am a little bit more optimistic. Right now, I know it cannot happen. You cannot do it. Now, on the other hand, when issues actually becomes serious, then government acts. Look at what happened in California. There is this years of drought and drought and drought and drought. They just take off that issues about, I mean, the local government. I'm not talking about the federal government. The local government, the governor, they just don't care about what cost. Is it human or nature? It is there every 4 years. They do water rationing. They actually take some drastic effort. And all the people who say, oh, they never work together, they actually work together because that is that issue. Unfortunately, it takes that kind of disaster on a major scale in order for government to act. Same thing about in California, not in California, in Florida. Okay, although all the politicians, they are Republicans, right? They don't talk about climate change. Sea level is really hurting a lot of the properties and things like this, economic. All the properties and everything in Florida. There's a lot of activity going on in Florida at the local level. They don't call it climate change. This politician, I mean, so because they need to be re-elected next time. But so they're working very hard to actually do everything they can to actually mitigate this sea level change. So things are happening in different area, and so those signal, as long as the extreme climate is, I think that threat is continue will be there. So we would get at some level with the newer generation that are now in years from now, hopefully not too long. I mean, we're not just thinking about just because right now, yeah, that the new generation come along, the new leaders, and they would be much more educated. Then we hope that the government actions would actually be more unified in that sense. But it's happening right now in different parts of the world. I mean, China changed their issue too. I mean, when it comes to pollution, they are the one that are doing most compared to to other people because they know it is hurting their own people. Okay, so they're actually are willing to do. I mean, in terms of pollution, because it's become such a problem to them, affecting the economics, affecting the health of the people, and also affecting their image too. That they're not able to handle their own problems. And so those things, the pressure is on. Unfortunately, you have to take real pressure for government to act. But I hope that in the future that something would happen quickly, and even in international level, I think the leaders are actually making more sense in what they try to do compared to say 10 years ago when they were really against each other in terms of the national policies and demanding unified policy and things like that. Now people are much more listening to each other, country to country, people to people, in terms of trying to get the best forward. So we hope that that would continue to improve that situation.
Maybe a few sentences. Okay, because actually I received all of my education in Hong Kong, and I'm now working in Hong Kong, so I'm 100% local. That's why I fully agree with Dr. Lam about the situation in Hong Kong. So I can share with you my experience. I have a 2-year-old kid, and I realized that education is not the most important thing, because when I teach her whether she needs to do that or not to do that, basically it's only about the dissemination of information. He know about what she should do or she should not do, but she know it. Whether she do it or not is another issue. It's about whether there is any incentive or panic. I'm not sure whether this approach could be applied to our government. So create some sort of incentive or create some sort of risk that force our government to do something. I don't know, because I'm not expert in this area, but it seems that information itself is not the only factor which can move people to do something. It's about incentive and also fear. So maybe my mind is a bit pessimistic, but it seems this is the case in the real world.
Thank you. I'm not as pessimistic as Lam Chiu-ying. Well, in fact, I would like to continue the point by Dr. Lee. I think the best driver for people to act, and in particular for politicians and policymakers to act, is crisis. And that is something that the scientific community can contribute. For instance, in this morning's discussion. Now, well, we have plenty of information, very robust scientific research and so on. But I think for politicians, what they need to know is when and where the next crisis will be, because if they don't respond to this crisis properly, I mean, they themselves will be in trouble. Now, so, I mean, for that purpose, for instance, I don't know whether the panel can summarize, say, since we're talking about Asia, what are the most vulnerable cities in Asia? So what I say, top 10 most vulnerable cities in Asia that will be affected by climate change, or probably the top 10 most vulnerable communities in Asia that will be affected by climate change. Or in Hong Kong's cases, where are the top 10 most vulnerable communities that will be affected by climate change? For example, whether it's Tai O, whether it's in Tolo Harbor or whatever. Now, if there can be a clear message to communicate with the society at large and with the politicians, that these are the crisis points that will be coming, I think the driver to act will be much stronger. And that is what I hope from the panel or from the scientific community. If you can contribute more about this message, about where the priorities are, that certainly will help the climate change debate.
So it comes back again to two-way communication. I don't think as someone who's not living in Hong Kong will be able to tell you exactly where or which of the area or which cities, but we could probably tell you the certain area that you need to worry for climate change. For example, low-lying area, okay, coastal area, or area that are likely to be hit by typhoon, exactly where. In a way, that is why the scientific community need to work with the local people who actually, with the local observatory and people who actually know exactly where to look for. We can give you information in terms of certain area that will be most vulnerable. For example, research tells us that the transition climate areas are most vulnerable. The semi-arid zones would tend to get drier. Then you need to worry about resource in that region. And things like that. That's the kind of information we can give you. But in terms of exactly, and there are also a scale too. And as the scale gets smaller, your uncertainty in terms of predicting what happened right at that point is getting larger. The larger the scale, the uncertainty tend to be smaller, it tend to be averaged out. So those are kind of the trade-off. The local politician or people, well, first of all, they have that concept, that knowledge, so that they are not making unreasonable demand or expectation from any policy they come up. They say, oh, I spent that many $1 million to do this, I expect this result to change. That's not going to happen. Okay, so we have to be truthful to what it is, and also about the uncertainty. Those are the kind of information we need to work with knowledgeable people that who actually have the government connection and can influence government and actually work with us, with you, and together to get that information across. So it's not simply simple, we can tell you exactly where to what are the top cities. It's not gonna, that's the way I see it.
In recent years, Food and Agriculture Organization proposed the concept about climate-smart agriculture. And in your researches, it seems that farmers are one of the most vulnerable groups that are affected by monsoon. So do you have any advice to the farmers in South Asia or even in Africa to adapt more climate-smart solutions? And also refer to what we discussed about the policy making. I think, well, actually, even G7 leaders make an agreement on climate change. Pope Francis yesterday published a long paper on climate change. Well, I think how to translate the climate change issues into the real crisis, the problems for the leaders to consider is more or less about how do they see the future. Then maybe the Asian leaders compared to European leaders lacking this kind of sensitivity or political sense, something like this.
I think that it's simple. It works? Yeah. it's good to develop a warning system. Yeah, because in a warning system, it's an integrated system where you put information coming for the science observation, but also the way the society is working, the way plants are growing, for example, and you put that all together, and you build this system. You try to use it. You have feedback of people. You see if it works, if it not works. So, and from that you can improve it. And this product is made by the convergence of different communities. And I think it's important because after you have an example to show to politicians that they have to help such initiative. Yeah. So it's one way. Often it's more for the weather or for the season, such things. For agriculture, it's on when will the monsoon start. So all the study concerning the onset, it's crucial everywhere. But it can concern drought also. But from that, it's possible to have an idea that if you go to another scale, so the climate scale, it's addition of all those. So people from that will have the perception what is the change. And from that, the problem of politicians, it's answer also to the previous question, have a time scale, very short time scale. So we have to think, and also people that are voting want results immediately. And we are in a society where we want results immediately. And Earth system doesn't work like that. You have a lot of time scale. But what we are dealing with now, it's a huge scale. It's faster than in the past, sure, much faster, but still too long relative to our life.
Yeah, actually, on the same issue, because what you said actually reminded me something that what scientists have done in talking to the politician and come up with policy, because policy issues usually politicians like to see results in a short time scale. When they spend the money, they want to see the result right away. And so you tell them you control CO2, long-lived gas, and you still have to wait 50 years before you see it. Let's forget it. That's not going to happen, okay? And plus all this pressure for the big oil company and things like that not to go by. But there is actually come out recently, some of you probably are aware, of a United Nations environmental report, which actually advocates a policy which is actually many politicians are looking at. In fact, China and India adopting is to, as I show you in the chart, there are many greenhouse gases. CO2 is long, it's hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. So it's going to be, although scientists keep telling politicians, they're not going to do a whole lot right away. But there are something called the short-lived greenhouse gas, methane, N2O, SO2. Those are actually pollution from pollution type of control and precursors, so ozone, okay? So N2O and some other exhaust. So those things, because they are, and including aerosol, they are short-lived. If you shut down all the factory and something like that, within 2 weeks, your air will get cleaned up, okay? CH4 and something are the same way. And technology exists in terms of controlling this. So IPCC have commissioned report using the global model to actually do experiment. If you now start to cut off that part of the greenhouse gas by a certain amount this year, right now or 10 years later, then you actually see an appreciable cooling effect by greenhouse gas. And that is the idea, is to convince politicians. If you do it now, within the 10-year time frame, your actually global model show there is a significant drop in the global temperature if everybody agree to do that. That is the kind of smart policy or
scientists actually keep thinking, because it's a roadblock if you ask people if you ask the government to control long-lived CO2. But those are the kind of things, in fact, my understanding is there's probably some the cost in China's softening their position in their negotiation with Japan and U.S. because now they said we will continue to increase the efficiency of the energy production. But on the other hand, we will clean up the black carbon, okay, which is also a contributor to global warming. So now you can see appreciable effect. India in the same situation. They're not going to worry about CO2. They will continue their coal burning power plant, but they're going to try to use pollution control to actually, because that is locally for them is a health problem. And so what we describe this as win-win situation. You try to look for those things. Scientists, politicians, local people work together to come up with strategy that is amenable to political action and see result in a shorter time, and as a demonstration that this science we're talking is for real, and we are saying that this would happen. So those are kind of things I think is kind of underground in helping to make the world to come up with solutions, and that's happening. That's the way I see it. So, yeah.
Hi. I agree very much with what Dr. Bill Lau said about action on the short life greenhouse gases, but I think he would agree with me that if we do not solve the CO2 problem, we're definitely cooked in the long term.
Yeah. We have to make that message very clear. This is a demonstration project. If you want to see result, here's what you can do, but it's not going to solve that problem.
So on the CO2 problem, I was one of the people helping organize this event and trying to encourage government people to come along. And it was, well, what decision are we going to make in the next year or two that this affects? And I think this comes back to talking to the science community. The conference we've just had out at Chinese U, there was really nobody talking about what the longer term consequences of the warming are. What will the monsoon system be like if we have an average global increase of 4 degrees centigrade? The people I start to ask questions, they say, that's so bad, that's so unthinkable, we don't think about it. But if we do not have our politicians understanding the consequences of our current trajectory of global warming, then we cannot expect them to take action. So I think that it is incumbent on the scientific community to paint the picture much more clearly as to what the 4 degrees centigrade world would look like, particularly getting it regional. What's the regional climate for southern China going to look like when the average temperature is plus 4 degrees centigrade? And at that point, maybe it is easier to persuade governments to take what is probably going to be quite expensive action and a lot of lifestyle change for us in order to prevent that 4 degrees centigrade world happening.